Greetings, you stalker lovers out there. Welcome again to the next episode of this Support Stalker Experiment, a series of videos I put together on the homecoming servers for the City of Heroes about the Stalker archetype and whether or not we can turn them into some sort of support variant. So instead of just going out there murdering everything, can you create a Stalker that's going to help the team survive through debuffing, through controlling, and through buffing? And our first experiment revolved around this guy here, Xaos Warden. And I went through the concept here of a Guardian Stalker who is going to use shield defense, which has grant cover in combination with leadership maneuvers, and pair that up with dark melee, which has a lot of to hit debuff, as well as soul mastery, and see if we can turn that into some sort of protector for the team. And so I presented his build to you, and I also showed you some solo action where he took on some level 52s and 53s and 54s. And then also I finished last video about a team. We're put together a squad of 5, and we ran a bunch of 54 times 8 tips as well as a mayhem mission red side, and we had minimal incarnate use and no other supporting archetype characters out there on the squad. So no defenders, no controllers, no corruptors, masterminds. Just this guy, Xaos Warden, the Guardian Stalker, or the Shadow Before the Fall, as he is called. And I try to find if there's some data that I can collect to somehow gauge his support ability. And kind of tongue in cheek here, but I'm comparing him to defenders and controllers directly because a few months ago I ran a whole series known as the DEFCON series, and I collected a bunch of data on 5 different defenders, 5 different controllers, head-to-head comparison with 5 different support sets, 51 total missions of data, and I arrived at lots of conclusions there. Mainly that these two classic archetypes are pretty darn close in the supportability realm, although controllers edged out defenders a little bit, mainly because of their pets. So now we're taking that set of data and we're going to compare it to the data I just collected about Xaos from those team missions and try to figure out, can stalkers like Xaos support the team as as well as these classic support archetypes. So let's go ahead and dive into the numbers here and see if we can get an answer or not. All right, first things first, we logged our mission data using the /log chat command in the City of Heroes game. So you go down to your little tell box, whatever you want to call that thing, /chat log or log chat. I think it's chat log. /log chat. And that will start recording your log file, which is just a record of all the events that happens to your character, every click, every damage, every attack, and it puts little timestamps with it, and it saves it into your logs file on wherever your game client is stored on your computer. Once you've done that, you can rename it, which is what I do, to whatever my character is, whatever mission I was running, and then you come over here to Sithlin's DPS tool that he's so kindly created for us, and I think I had a link to this in my previous video. I'll put another one in this video. But you go ahead and you browse for one of those text files. So here you can see them, Xaos Team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you open it in Sithlin's tool, and boom, just like that, it does a bunch of calculations. And then you can go to these various tabs like damage out and status out and damage in and heals and buffs and combat filters, blah, blah, blah. The main ones I care about are the damages, the statuses, damage, healing, and to a lesser degree, the overall summary. So, boom, you open it up, you get all this data. Now, before I did all that, I did splice my raw uh, chat log file into the individual missions so that there was no overlap or any confusion between the different missions. I believe you can do that sort of using the little timeline thing down here, which is kind of cut off on the bottom of my screen. But anyway, you can, there are some sliders within the tool that allows you to kind of do the same thing. But I'm doing a little bit more than what his tool is capable of doing currently. So I spliced my data down into the 5 different files and popped each one of these into Sithlin's tool. And then did some additional calculations that his tool's not doing using Excel, and use that combination to produce the data I'm about to show you, the stats I'm about to show you. So let me go ahead and pull that up for you, close this down, and here is the main feature for today. So what you've got here, and I've got a color-coded mission by mission, kind of go quick scroll through here, but the idea is each mission, I've got it color-coded, I've got a screenshot of the summary table that you saw from Sithlin's tool. So as Sithlin's tool, I just did a screenshot of this and then fancied it up with a little color border. And then I also took some of the raw data his tool collects, punched that into Excel, did some different calculations, which I'll explain in a second. And then this is just sort of a little copy paste of that table that I created using Excel. And then I also have another table here that I got out of Sithlin's tool, and I've modified it slightly for purpose of this video using Excel as well. But anyway, what do we got here? What am I doing? What am I showing you? And then let's get down to actually comparing the Stalker to the defenders and controllers to see if there's anything we can see here. But here's what we've got. So Sithlin's tool is giving me this main table here, and the things that I care mostly about are the total damage and the damage taken. The rest of these numbers is not super critical for what I care about. I don't really care about XP or infamy. Now this could be something to use as a comparative standard, the rewards you're getting per minute. So it's something I can look at later, but it's not something I cared about in this particular instance. I didn't really care anything about heals. I might come back and look at this a little bit later because it could be a measurement of survivability, because it's recording how many heals your Stalker gets. So it could be useful to find out how many times do I need to get some green juice in order to survive. Although that's not 100% true because you can get healed for more than you need. So that's why this is not super critical, and not every team or, a character you're going to be running is going to even have a heal. So this is minor on my scale. And then the other number I'm not really concerned about. I mentioned this in the team video I put out the other day when I was talking about the solo stats, and that's the total DPS. Now his tool, ultimately, this is its purpose is to give you a real-time measurement, I think, of your DPS that you're putting out. But for me and what I'm trying to do, it's not super useful as is, because what it's doing, and from what I'm able to tell, is it's taking the damage that you're doing. So this is your damage that you do, and it's dividing that by seconds. But it's seconds of combat. And so what that means is it's not including any of the seconds or minutes of a mission where you're not actively dealing damage or taking damage. So this time that you're seeing here is not the actual time of the mission, at least as I would define it. It's the time of combat when you're clicking and being hit and that sort of thing. So that's the difference, or why I don't really need this number, because it's taking the total damage and dividing it by this many minutes and seconds, turning this into total seconds. So that's your denominator here for this total damage that gives you this. So now this is useful if you're just trying to see in real-time combat, how much DPS is your character putting out or in a specific scenario. But for what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to see the more global picture, which includes all of that minutia of moving through the map, positioning, that sort of thing, where you're not actively attacking or being attacked. So that's why you're going to see down here in my table that mission 1 actually took 19 minutes. This is time. This was the actual time of the video. So I had recorded the video, and from the time we entered the mission and about to engage the first enemy to the time that we clicked exit the mission, it took about 19 minutes. I did shave off a minute here and there for some of these missions just due to the nature of the mission, where if you're kind of doing what I would call a bug hunt, looking around the map after you defeated everything for a glowy, or trying to find a boss, or escorting somebody and there's no ambushes coming. So I will sometimes adjust this time based upon just the circumstances. But for the most part, it's the total minutes of time that it takes your team to complete whatever the objective is. So that's the big difference here. So you can see that, Sithlin's tool saying, hey, you actually fought for 7 minutes and 48 seconds. The video is telling me that there's another, 11 minutes and 12 seconds or so, 11, 12 minutes of time of, wandering around the map or looking around the map or moving into positions, going room to room, that sort of thing. So this is my denominator for these numbers that you're going to see over here, or what I'm calling the rates. The rates are me taking my totals, whatever that total is, based on the stat, and dividing it by this 19 minutes. That's giving me these numbers over here. So that's why this number is not critical for me either from Sithlin's tool. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, boy, you seem like you just cut out most of his data. No, not really, because the key stuff is, you can see here, for instance, total damage, I use that, and damage taken, I use that. Those are my numbers you see here and here. And those are actually the numbers that would have taken me the longest time to calculate if I were just doing this by hand using a combination of ChatGPT and Microsoft Excel, which is what I had done with my DEFCON series. Sithlin's tool is like instantaneously doing these calculations for me, which bless you, Sithlin, for figuring this out. Now you will notice there's a discrepancy between his total damage, 73 and 82. I think, actually, no, this was not. There's another example of one. I think I used a different total number because there was some damage done by a, what was it, one of those crystals or whatever it was, so I didn't count it. But anyway, that's what you're seeing here. If you see any discrepancies between some of the numbers, I might have gotten rid of some of the damage. For instance, if you're on the what is it, the mayhem mission, and a car blows up and you take damage from an exploding car, I'm not counting that as damage I'm taking from enemies. So little things like that I'll edit out, and that may be some of the discrepancies you see or differences. But there you go. So I have his total data, and I'm also, of course, using the other big thing his tool allows me to use is quickly go into like status effects that I'm doing, my controlling abilities, which for sure I want to use this data. Or if at some point I do need to go back and take a look at, healing or endurance, that sort of thing, I can get that data from this tab. Or if I want to look at, what is it? I think it's damage in. Yeah, so the damage in is how much damage I'm taking, but it also lists all of these status effects that are hitting me. So if I need to get that data, it's sitting here as well. The other nice thing the tool does is it also looks at the pets and tells you, for instance, hey, my pet damage, how much damage did they take? I was only looking at, when I did my DEFCON series, how much damage my pets dealt, which is what this first tab here is showing you. So Behemoth and the critical mass, which was one of the pets I freed from the jail in that mayhem mission, Night Widow. That's how much damage they dealt. But also I can see how much damage they took. So Behemoth took damage, critical mass took damage, etc., etc., etc. Night Widow took damage. So there's a lot of little bits and pieces of data that are in here that I haven't used in this particular analysis, but I'll probably use it when I do my more head-to-head stalker things. But for this analysis, I only have one stalker, and I've got the defender batch data and I've got the controller batch data that I can compare to head to head. And my older batches of data didn't have all of those nitty gritty details that Sithlin's tool provides us. So anyway, what do we got here? That's all my kind of background info. Now, what happened? What's going on with the mission? So here it is, mission 1. 19 minutes of time, 0 defeats. I didn't die this mission. Spoiler, my stalker didn't die at all in any of these 5 missions I ran. He was 0 for 5, pitching a shutout, however you want to word it. Ally defeats. This mission, there were 2. And what the rate is telling you is this is how many allies were defeated per minute. So that's what that means. So 0.11 per minute. So if you want to figure out, hey, times an hour, you can multiply that by 60. How many times an hour, somebody's going to die? So it'd be like 6 allies an hour, roughly. So this gives you an idea of how, vulnerable you may be to dying. So these are kind of 2 of my main metrics of safety. How many times am I dying? How many times are my allies dying? If I'm dying, of course, that's probably a bad build or bad tactics or something, and I can't certainly support a team if I'm dead. So that's an important metric about just the stability of your build. But probably one of the main just, hey, how good of a job are you doing at supporting the team is, well, how many times did your allies die? Now, sometimes it's totally out of your control. And the 2 deaths in this particular instance, if you go back and watch the video from the last session that I released, those 2 deaths really wasn't anything I could do about it. The Dominator died both times. He was under leveled compared to the rest of us, so he was fighting +5s, and just a boss, like, I think nuked him one time, and then the other time he got knifed in the back or something like that. It was nothing I could do. He was down before he even knew it hit him. But that's an important metric just for safety. So this first mission, a little bit shaky. That's kind of on the higher side. We'll take a look at the defender and controller numbers in a minute, but that's a little bit high. Not terrible, but a little bit. And then foe defeats. This is kind of measurement of how, I don't know how much damage, because that's this one, but finishing killing blows that I was doing. So I personally defeated 48 foes, which was a rate of 2.5. We're going to compare this to the defenders and controllers to see how punchy this guy was, how well was he able to set up kills for himself. What would be nice, and this is where it'd be nice to have my data from my allies to see what their numbers are. Now, you can get your allies defeated numbers, not how many times they were defeated, but how many times they defeat. How many times they defeat an enemy. So ally versus enemy numbers. But I found it to be unreliable in the past, because if one of your allies defeats an enemy while they're not within proximity to you, the chat log can miss it. So let's say, you're in one room, your allies in another room, and they're killing stuff. You don't get a record of any of that. So I can't say for a fact that the number of foes that my chat log is registering is the true number of defeats that my allies scored. So that's why I don't count what my chat log is saying, because it's not accurate. But it gives me an idea of how good my character is at finishing blows. And then the other number, of course, is just your raw damage output. So how much DPS, or DPM in this case, is my character doing? And that's why, again, you'll see it here. If this was a true number, I should be able to take this times 60 to get DPM. But if I do, it's not going to be anywhere near this DPM. So here my DPM is 38,900. But if I were to just take this DPS times 60, I'd be like 9,000 or something like that. So it'd be like 2.5, 3 times this number here. And again, that's because a lot of the time is not being registered by Sithlin's tool. He's only registering the actual clicky combat encounters, not the total minutes of the mission. So just be aware of that if you are using this tool. And then the other stat, of course, you see me recording or showing you here is the input. So how much damage am I taking? How resilient is my character? How much damage per minute is he suffering? 277 is the number you see in here. So these are the main stats that I have recorded, and this matches my DEFCON series. This was exactly the 5 things that the DEFCON 5 series was recording. Personal defeats, ally defeats, foe defeats, my output damage, and my incoming damage. Then the other thing I'm showing you here that I didn't have from my original DEFCON, but Sithlin's tool makes it super easy, are the control numbers. And the importance of these is because I'm talking about making a support stalker. And the two main ways I'm doing that is debuffing enemies so that they can't harm my team or they're easier to defeat, whatever the case may be. And control, how well I can lock things down, knock things down, prevent stuff from running, that kind of stuff. Now, Sithlin's tool doesn't record debuff numbers anywhere that I've seen. So I can't tell you, for instance, the number of minus recharges or the number of minus to hits I applied. You know, I don't know if the chat log even records that anyway, so his tool doesn't show it. But I can get a measure of how many controls I laid out there. And this is going to be an interesting stat to compare Stalker versus Stalker, because it is one of my main 2 ways that I talked about in my initial concept video of this whole idea behind a support stalker's, debuffing and controlling. Now, the one thing that's unique about this particular test and this particular character is there is a third support option, but this is the only guy who's doing it, and that is through team buffing. He is, Xaos that is, providing plus defense. So that is the main way you can buff. I can't think of a stalker off the top of my head who has a way to heal other people, normally aside from like the medicine pool, but there's really nothing in their toolkit, their primary, secondary, or their epic sets that allows you to do much buffing, except for shield defense has plus defense in it. So this is not going to be the norm at all. This is just mainly what you're going to see with Xaos and how he is uniquely built around this idea of a buffing guardian type of stalker. But anyway, what you're seeing here are the different powers that I use, as well as my different pets. And by the way, it counts shield charge as a pet, and it's telling you how many times that particular power did its thing. So knockdown is one of the big controls that this character has. He doesn't have a lot of controls. He's got knockdown as one of them. He does have a hold with Soulstorm. He does have immobilize with Midnight Grasp, and he does have fear with Touch of Fear. And you also have Fear Incarnate, I believe, is from my Vigilante power. And also you have a sort of a fear when you do an Assassin's Strike, but I don't know if it logs that particular number or not. But anyway, those are my main controls, and you can see one of the biggest ones right here. Shield charge, 102 knockdowns that power delivered. That's huge. I don't know how many times I activated. I think it's a number you can find in here somewhere, but it's let me see if I can pull up Sithlin's. I remember looking for it. I think it's somewhere in Sithlin's, so you can kind of figure out how many times you use shield charge, but it's not easy to locate. Not like the other attacks, because it's treating it as a pet. But anyway, 102 knockdowns. That's huge, right? I mean, I don't know how many enemies, right? I attacked in total. I know I defeated 48, but 102 different people got knocked down by a shield charge, and I was only shield charging, once per spawn. It wasn't like I was multiply shield charging the same guy 10 times. So that's got to be at least 20 different, hits with shield charge across, multiple groups. So very good amount of control with that power. And I also got, and this is a little bit, more feeble than I was hoping, but 14 knockdowns. This is from my proc, the Superior Avalanche. And that's in my Touch of Fear power, which also does the Terrorize or Fear. So Touch of Fear didn't do as much control as I originally was thinking it was. I figured, hey, it's got fear and it should have a chance to knock down. That should be a good combo. You're scaring people and you're knocking them down. It wasn't lighting up the board with how efficient it was. It did its thing, but Shield Charge is much more, you know, uh, efficient at being a good crowd control power here. All right, so that was mission one. Now, the same thing, and I'm not going to go in nauseating detail with the other ones, but you can kind of at least see that, hey, here's what I was doing. Mission two was the next one. This was really short. This was a 5-minute mission that we ran and left at that point, so only 5 minutes. No defeats again. None of the allies was defeated. Only 19 foes defeated this time, but 3.8 is pretty good because the last mission I was defeating 2.5, so I'm actually defeating more per minute. Damage output 864 a minute and 173 is incoming. So, damage output really hit the tank on this one. Damage input was, I think, probably one of the lower ones I had, but it was a real short mission. We only took on a handful of spawns before we were able to just exit the map. So it wasn't anything exciting. Real short, real sweet. Controls, again, minimal stuff happened here. Even the shield charge, was still pretty, it was the number one control I had. It was only 28 this time around. The other thing I did notice is I didn't get a lot of holds from Soulstorm here. I wasn't using it that much, I don't think. But it also is only going to hold minions and lieutenants, and I was mostly focusing on tougher targets like the bosses, just given the fact that I could lay down some heavy damage on them being a stalker. Plus, I wanted to focus my debuffs from Dark Melee on those guys. Then mission 3, continuing our little story here, we've got a 17-minute mission on this one, so we're back up into a longer mission. Personal defeats, none again. No allies were defeated. We got 3.4 foes a minute, so we're keeping our higher kill per minute numbers as we saw with mission 2. Damage output is going back up 2,900, and then our damage in is 173. So if we kind of compare that, same damage input as the previous mission, but about double the, actually more than double the damage output, like 3 times the damage output, something like that. And less than the first mission, though. So kind of, a little scattershot data at this point, but that's why I run multiple missions, just to kind of be able to take a look at all the missions as one conglomerate group here. Another showcase of shield charge doing the work. 91 knockdowns. I did get some really good fear on this one, 38, and by proxy another 23 touch of fear knockdown procs thrown in here as well. So in this mission 3, the touch of fear was doing a much more work than it had been doing in the previous 2 missions. And moving on to mission 4. In this one, we had 14 minutes, a little bit shorter, but another set of data where we had no defeats for me. We had no defeats for my teammates. Foes, 50, 3.6 per minute. So that's another pretty high number that I got going on here. Damage output's pretty, good, 6,000 a minute. 437 in. That might have been the most damage I took per minute, 437. Let me confirm that. Yeah, so I have to go back and look at what was going on, at least in that 4th mission, that I was taking a lot more damage. This was one with Carnies, I remember. And I think I was getting hit in the side hole a bunch of times from the mistresses and things who like to hang back and plink away with their psi attacks. I remember that distinctly because our tank, Wednesday's tank there, oh, I can't remember the name there, but she was, in melee, obviously rounding things up. But a lot of times those mistresses were just hanging back, while the illusionists and stuff were all over the tank. So they were like blasting me from range while I was trying to, work the perimeter. Another huge set of another huge set of numbers here on the shield charge was 65. 22 fears, not too bad. Superior Avalanche kicked in another 10 knockdowns. So not too bad. Knockdown seems to be his number one way of crowd control. And then the last mission was the Mayhem mission. This was the longest mission, 22 minutes, but not over the top gross amount of time. But it was pretty lengthy, 22 minutes. No defeats again for me. And here's where we had our next character defeat. We had one, I think it was, oh yeah, this was where our blaster Vile got shot in the back or whatever from PPD that came ambushing around the corner, I think, or something like that. So he ends up biting the bullet here. But it's only one defeat. So if you add them all up, I had 3 total defeats across all 5 of these missions, and I was the only main source of support with my shield defense in combination with the dark melee debuff and the soul mastery debuffing. Foe defeats 4.9 per minute. I think that was the highest number we had this time, and 4,000 damage out, 186 in. Very low damage input. So 4.9 and 186. I'm pretty sure those were yep. So 4.9 was better than the foe defeats here. Damage in, it was less. Damage in, 173 versus 186. So this was like the second lowest damage input, highest foe defeats. And the Mayhems are notorious just for being the toughest missions that I run with these things. So it's pretty impressive that he was, still able to do, a bunch of killing, maintaining low body counts for himself and his teammates, and barely get scratched in the process. Another huge number of knockdowns from shield charge, decent number of knockdowns from the Spirit Avalanche proc, a good number of fears from Touch of Fear there. So overall, I think the strategy I had going into this, using some control with the knockdowns and the fears, really worked well with then the bubble of defense I was throwing around there with Grant cover and maneuvers. And then in combination with the minus to hit, I was putting out there with my attacks. So I think it all added up. And if you take a look at the final total numbers here, the average, these are the average rates for this Stalker. So taking all those numbers from above, the average rate, 0 per minute. Personal defeats. Ally defeats were 0.03 per minute. So that's, barely anything. Then you've got 3.6 foes are defeated per minute. Damage output was 5,000 and some change per minute. And damage input was, 249. So not a lot. But hey, what do these numbers really mean? Because we need something to compare to. And we don't have another Stalker to compare to and say, hey, how did this Stalker do to the others compared to the other Stalker? Now, I'm not even sure that's really my main question anyway. My main question is what I'm about to show you, and that is, what if we take these numbers versus my DEFCON, versus my defenders, versus my controllers? How do these numbers stack up versus those guys? Because they are supposedly the support classes, right? I mean, defenders, controllers. Those are probably your top 2 picks. But let's go ahead and take a look. So what I did is I took the numbers that I just showed you, so personal defeats, and I plotted them on the same graphs I had shown and made back with my DEFCON finale. And so the survivability rate is the first graph we're going to take a look at. And what this is plotting is those personal defeats per minute, the rate of defeat per minute. And you've got in blue is your defenders average. This was average of 5 defenders. Then you got your controllers here in that orangey color. That was the 5 controllers from the DEFCON over their 5 missions each. So 25 and 25. And then here's my one Stalker with his 5 missions. So the data isn't going to be super reliable yet because I don't have a lot of Stalker information, but at least it gives us a snapshot of where Xaos fits amongst, the continuum here. So survivability, he was perfect, right? Never died. Couple close calls, but never hit the mat. Defenders 0.02 and controllers was 0.09. And just remember the little school here. hey, what are these lines? Those are your error bars, and we're going to use those to compare these bar graphs with each other, because what the bar graphs are showing us is the peaks here, the tops of these bars. That is the average. That's the mean of the data. So on average, defenders were dying 0.02 times per minute. Controllers were dying about half of that, 0.009. And then, hey, is that a significant difference? What the error bars allow us to do is look for overlap. If there is overlap between the error bars, which there is in this case, that is not a significant difference. So even though you're looking at this going, hey, those defenders were twice as likely to die per minute as the controller, while that is mathematically a true, statement or accurate statement, it's not statistically significant because there is overlap between the bars. And what the bars are telling you is the true mean, the actual average could be anywhere in this bar range. So it could be anywhere in here. So because there's overlap, you can't say that they're statistically significant. Now, hey, where does the Stalker fit in? Well, he's down here, right? And he doesn't have any error bars, so there's no deviation from zero. So right now he's looking pretty good. So if all the other Stalkers finish very similar to this, then yeah, we could say the Stalkers are much more survivable than the Defenders and Controllers, which may or may not be true. We don't know. They certainly have an armor set that would help explain if that was the case, but we don't know that yet. All right, so then we got that. The next set of data we had to take a look at was the risk rate data. This is the ally defeat. So what is their risk on the team? So how many times were allies defeated per minute? We got the same three colors, the same three bars. We've got defenders in blue, controllers in the orange, and stalkers in green. And this is where things are a little bit interesting. Again, this is just Xaos. We don't have any other data yet. But we can see our defenders and controllers, no significant difference in risk to allies for those two. But with Xaos is very safe. He is statistically significantly less risk to his allies than the defender and the controller. Just one stalker, 5 missions. These are 5 defenders, 5 controllers, 25 missions, 25 missions. So we got a lot more data here to look at. But so far, I mean, if this were to hold true, then yes, the stalkers are a significantly lower risk to their allies. Is this true? Is this going to mean that stalkers are the superior supporting archetype? I don't know. We need to get more data, of course. Let's take a look at the next set of data. We've got lethality. This was the foe defeats per minute. This was also interesting, I thought, because, I'm sure if I were to ask you, hey, who's going to kill more things on a team? The stalker, the defender, the controller? I'm sure most of you, the stalker, of course the stalker. Right there. Check this out, though. A literal tie with controllers, really minimal error. Again, this is just Xaos, so we can't say too much yet, but versus Xaos, Xaos is the same as the average controller. And he's only, I don't even know if this is true. It's hard to say. I'd have to put in the minor grid lines, but it's darn close, right? Very slightly more significantly lethal than a defender. This was one of these stats that did separate controllers from defenders, and one of the reasons for that was because the controller pets were doing so much damage that they were helping the controllers score a lot more kills per minute. What's the stalker's explanation? He does have pets, but they're not any better than the controller pets, I would imagine, and not any different than the defender pets. Controller pets would be superior to both of them. But he's got a lot of damage output, so I'm sure that's explaining why the lethality rates is as high as it is. But it kind of makes you, wonder if you played your stalker a little more, conservatively, you could kind of lose this competition. But yeah, this was a surprise to me that wow, the stalker should have been up here, right? I mean, what the heck? Why is he not up there? Now, I didn't build Xaos to be some DPS machine, so that is true. So if I'd made him as a pure damager, then I would imagine this is going to be a bigger number. But if that's the case, then I would also imagine the ally risk probably would have went up because I wasn't being as supportive as I had built the character to be. So there's our lethality numbers. What else we got? We got the threat. This is our damage output. So here is, just a direct measure of your offense. How much damage are you doing? And this includes, all sources of your damage. So your own personal damage plus your pets and whatever else you got going for you. So damage per minute. Defenders and controllers, when I originally did this analysis, the controllers were slightly more significantly higher in their damage output. Again, it was because of pets. But here, check out this. This is our first, I don't want to say our first really significant, but it's our first expected significant difference, I think, is that the Stalker is statistically significantly putting out more damage per minute than a controller and a defender. That should not be a surprise to anybody. Now, hey, is that surprising that it's not more dramatic than this? Because it's not a huge difference, right? If the controllers put out their maximum like 4,000 and the stalkers put out their minimum 45 4,400, it wouldn't be a huge difference between these two. So your top controller versus your worst performance by Xaos is pretty close to one another. And considering that stalkers are supposed to be really super high damage, this is a little bit interesting, a little bit surprising, but they clearly won that matchup. Then we're going to take a look at the pet contribution. Now, here's what I thought was really freaking bizarre, because I've been telling you how much damage output the pets have done from the entire DEFCON series, and in particular, controller pets. They're almost 50%. Here's the 50% mark. So controllers themselves are putting out about 55% of their own damage, and their pets are contributing about 45. Sometimes it was more than, above 50, sometimes around 40. Versus the defenders over here, defenders are doing about 70% of their own damage, and their pets were contributing about 30%. Now, here's what's bizarre. When I made this Stalker, I specifically wanted pets because I wanted to get the maximum damage output I could. And I knew from this experiment, the DEFCON series, that pets were contributing. So Xaos has a Night Widow from Soul Mastery, and Xaos has lore pets, the demons, the circle ones. He's got the Behemoth, and he has the non-damaging pet, the spirit or whatever, because I wanted that one because it had the to hit the buff aura. But he does have two pets, so I would expect, he should be close to what defender, pets should be doing, because most of my defender builds had only a couple pets. My controllers would have had more, obviously, because they have a pet as part of their primary, but the stalker's pets were only accounting for about, what was it, 5-6%, something like that. So 95.5, 94.6. So that to me was like a head scratch. Like, why is the stalker pet so low on the damage? I would assume all lore pets are kind of balanced on the same scale. I could imagine, well, maybe the damage scaler on stalker pets is lower. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a way I can look that up in CD data or not, but that's my only explanation. Do stalker pets have a lower damage output? Because the Night Widow has a bunch of attacks. So this was a little bit interesting. Another option here is because maybe the stalker's damage output is much faster. So the stalker pets don't have time to put in a bunch of damage, whereas your defender and your controller are putting out less damage. And if you look again, check it out. The defender's putting out more damage than the controllers on average, but the stalker's doubling. It's like the stalker is equal to the two of these guys combined, 170,000. Now, this is a little bit, sorry, not a literal addition, because this is 25 missions worth of data. This is only 5. So you can kind of extrapolate from there. So they're doing, more damage, maybe with spikier damage, And these guys are more like attrition, slow damage. Maybe, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see as I get the rest of that data and get up to the 25 missions of stalkers, then I can see, does this thing hold true? Right now, these are the raw totals, but it's the percents I'm really concerned about. What fraction of that total damage output is coming from pets? And right now, the pets are minimal amounts of damage. Now, that if this holds true for a stalker, that the pets are only contributing less than 10% of their damage, well, then picking the pet for a stalker is a wasted pick. Especially, I think I have mine's 5 slotted. So I could dump that power, pick something else like Shadow Brawl or Punch, whatever it is, the tier 1 punch that I didn't take, and 5 slot that, and I bet you I get this much damage by just throwing it in my rotation. So that's where I want to keep my eye on this, because if, the pets just aren't worth it, then I'm not going to bother taking them on my stalkers. But it could have just been this particular pet, could have just been this particular stalker with the, hitting with the big old shield charge, is nuking stuff. I don't know. Plus the team might have been trashing things faster than the Night Widow could have gone out. I will also say I was a little bit more tentative with summoning this pet compared to when my defender controller pets were recharged. Boom, they were back on the field. There's a few times where I didn't summon it right away. I was more maybe strategic might be the better word than tentative. Strategic. So I didn't just summon it willy nilly. Because I had no way to really protect it, so I didn't want it just to die, just drop it any old place. But I also was setting up my hide a lot, or my stealth, and so I didn't want to be hidden and then summon my pet right next to me, who's then going to get spotted and then we get attacked, right? So a lot of times I was kind of setting up my move while I was hidden or waiting to be hidden, and then okay, I get in there and then pull out the Whittle once the fight is engaged. But by then I, slammed a bunch of damage in there. And I'm pretty sure the other, like, I remember Charnel, Wednesday's tank was doing some decent damage too. So they just might, and then we had a couple blasters at one point. So we had a lot of DPS, I think, that could help explain this lack of contribution from my pet. All right, let's continue. Then our next stat is our like true defensive stat. This is our resilience. This is how much input damage we're taking. And this one surprises me a little bit because when you're thinking about incoming damage, you're probably, your defender's controller should be able to protect the team and whatever else, especially controllers, right? They got buffs and they got controls, and but then you take a look at these numbers. I mean, already there was a slightly significant difference between controllers and defenders. Very close, the two of them again. And again, I was ultimately attributing this to the presence of pets, because the controller pets were aggro soaks, they were damage soaks. So, the defender didn't have as much pet shielding, meat shields, as the controller did. So I think that helps explain it. Plus, I think just the defender playstyle, at least the way I'm playing mine, is much more aggressive up in the face of the enemy. Now, the Stalker was definitely aggressive and definitely up in the face of the enemy, but took the least amount of damage. This is, again, Xaos only data versus, 5 different defenders, 5 different controllers, but statistically significant less damage per minute incoming. I think it's pretty easy to explain it, even though I was a little bit surprised at first, because Xaos and all stalkers, they have an armor set, right? They have an entire secondary based around survivability. Whereas, defenders, controllers, their armor doesn't come until you get it from your patron or your epic or your ancillary power pool. Before that, you have to rely upon your debuffs, your controls, your heals, that sort of thing. So this maybe isn't that surprising, right? You get an armor set, especially, decent defense set. This makes a little more sense. So what I want to do is actually compare this guy versus, because he has a lot of defense. What about him versus my traps defender, Sherry, as an example? She was very high defense build. how does that 249 compare to her numbers? And I'm pretty sure they were actually pretty close. Let me pull that up real quick. All right, yeah. Now here is my mess of my Excel files. So I'll show you guys where I'm looking. So here's my defender traps. They are this column right here. This is Sherry's data, and this is the rate of damage incoming right here. So for her 5 missions, she had 428, 162, 241, 467, 169. So if you compare that to what we just saw with our Stalker, 249, right? She actually took less damage on 3 of her 5 missions. So a high defense defender is as survivable or resilient in this case as the Stalker was, who was also, he wasn't built like for sheer defense, but he had a decent amount of a defense I was managing to get out there with his shield powers in combination with Shadow Dweller and just his slotting. So this number, even though it's like obvious, right? There are some of my defenders and the controllers as well. I can take a look at some of those. Look for other people that are in that 259 range. Controllers are over in this section here. You can see you've got a few, like here's Kinetics was pretty good at survivability. That was my Earth Kinetics controller. And then you had another pretty solid one was Nature Dark Control. Yeah, Dark Nature. That was a debuffing beast. Those two were really good at survivability. I mean, they just had a lot of debuff that was going on. So, the Stalker numbers for just Xaos look pretty impressive. But some of the defenders, some of the controllers can match that. There are defenders and controllers that are down here as well. There was just some other ones that were up here that were making it skewing the day a little bit. So this will be interesting to watch this. Does this hold true? I don't think it will, because I think Xaos is probably one of my more defensively built, my more survivable build plan out there. Yeah, all my other stalkers are gonna have armor sets, but he was built to debuff to hit. He was built for plus defense, that kind of thing. My other guys and gals aren't gonna be built the same way. So we'll have to keep our eye on that one and see what happens. And then the last thing I want to show you guys here is then just, this is another interesting stat, efficiency. This is just the ratio of the outs to the ins. So your offense to defense ratio. Because, if you're just focusing all on just dealing damage and just opening yourself up to an A whooping, this number can be super, high, this ratio. But if your defense is really good and keep it really low, then, it's going to be even higher. So let's take a look. Defenders, for the most part, had a 10-to-1 ratio of damage out versus damage in. Controllers were slightly better again. This was very close between these two archetypes. I had a whole conversation about in the DEFCON series. Super close between the two of them. Again, it really came down to pets contributing extra damage, keeping incoming damage less because, the controller wasn't getting hit, but the pets were getting hit. And that's something else that Sithlin's tool does do. It does show you the pet's damage. So, hypothetically, I could go back and look at that as a metric now using this tool. But anyway, all right, pretty good numbers, 10 to 14. But check this out. My Stalker is 23, 24 to 1. So that's how many times more damage he's dealing than taking. That's huge. It's clearly significantly better. Again, it's just one. It's just Xaos. And there was, some missions where it was pretty low-ish, somewhere in the upper teens, which is pretty close to where my controllers were maxing out. So it's not like he's a beast, but what's going to happen as you move forward, as we get maybe some stalkers with less defense, more offense, or less offense, more damage resistance. What happens in those scenarios? So I'm going to be watching this number here. Does it go up? Does it go down? Because at this point, from what I'm seeing, just by these metrics, right? And you take a look for yourself. Stalkers are taking less damage per minute. Stalkers are dealing more damage per minute. Stalkers are as lethal per minute as the controllers who won the DEFCON series. Stalkers have significantly lower risk to teammates. Stalkers are shutting out being defeated compared to the defenders controllers. So of these metrics, 3 of them for sure are favoring the Stalker as a better supporting archetype than defenders controllers, which is kind of freaking funny or scary depending on your perspective. But I mean, that's where we're at, guys. That's why it's an experiment. That's why we got to collect the data. Because is this just a flash in the pan, or is this for real? Should you all be running out there making support stalkers and like just shelving your defenders and controllers and your corruptors and masterminds? I don't know. We're gonna find out. So that's what I want you guys to see. That's what I wanted to share with you all. Hopefully, there's some cool stuff in here to make you think and get you to run out there and make your own support stalker. In the meantime, though, have yourselves a good night. We'll catch you in the next one. I think we're gonna be running with Dead Cell, the drain before the pain. So until then, peace out.